What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Debbie Rao YouTube channel. We're back with another top 25 preview. We're at number 18, and a surprise team sitting there at number 18 here in the athletics rankings, and that's the Clemson Tigers. Talking about them coming back. This is probably the lowest that I've seen them in probably the last, 7-8 years in terms of where their outlook is projected at. Last year, we'll get into kind of the last season, but big year for Dabo Sweeney and this Clemson offense, and really this Clemson team to get back into the top 5, right? To kind of really take back and get back into the playoff now. Now, when we're looking at last year's team, we got to talk about it. I'm sorry, Clemson fans. We got to get into it. 9-4 last year. They finished 20th in the final AP poll. And to be quite honest with you, I don't care what Dabo says. It was a failure. Like, that's not a Clemson level kind of what they expect anymore. Those expectations, are higher, in my opinion, with what they want. And then last year when you saw it, they lost when you coming out of the season and you lose to Duke. You can't lose to Duke in the first game of the year, right? That was a big, big loss for them there. And then, after that, losing to Florida State, then Miami, North Carolina State. And we talked about North Carolina already, how big of a win that was for that program. And on the flip end, we should have probably noticed when that Duke loss that happened, the turnovers that happened in that game, it was just not good from there on out. They did win the Gator Bowl against Kentucky, 38-35. But again, these are not the expectations that we are used to for a Clemson team. And really, that's where they kind of has to bounce back. And when you look at this and why they kind of struggled, it was their offense. Their offense really struggled last year. They were 59th in points per game at 26.8. When you're looking at, just overall yards per game, they were 68th in the country. When you're talking about red zone scoring, and this is really the number that stands out to me when you dive into Clemson's offensive struggles. Red zone scoring, 127th was their ranking last year. They just couldn't score in the red zone. They got there. They turned the ball over. There was a lot of problems there from that perspective. Their passing offense was pretty abysmal. Yards per pass is 121st last year. Looking at passing yards per game, 76th. Rushing was okay, a little bit better, but just not efficient and really not what they thought when they were bringing Riley in to kind of take over that offense and what we saw. So, what is there any hope, Christian? That's where we're going to start this video off. Is there any hope for the 2024 offense to be better?
I think so. I think part of the reason the offense struggled, especially from the get-go last year, Riley came in, Klubnik never really had time with those receivers because the injuries just derailed their ability to create chemistry. I think Tyler Brown was a nice surprise in that wide receiver room, but Antonio Williams in and out of the lineup, just not. Adam Randall was inconsistent. He just wasn't able to kind of take that next step like we had hoped. So I do think that there's hope. This offensive line is largely coming back in full. Ryan Linthicum is the newcomer at center, but when he was out there in his limited snaps last year, he was pretty good. Walker Parks is a graduate now and brings them a little bit of experience. So I think this offensive line also struggled with some of the new concepts. Didn't really perform up to standard, but when you look at the offense, they haven't had wide receivers quite like this in a long time. They've got a couple of freshmen that I think can be impact players behind Antonio Williams, Tyler Brown. I think Adam Randall's job is kind of up in the air right now, just with how rough it was last year. And granted, that's another year off of injury. So I think we're going to find out a lot more as we head into the season. But despite the wide receivers, Cade Klubnik has to be better too. Yeah. I think that's a piece of this where you lose Will Shipley, who you really had to rely on a lot last year. We love Phil Maffa in this backfield. I think he's ready to take over as the primary ball carrier, but Cade Klubnik is going to have to be a lot better if this Clemson offense is going to take a step forward this year.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to Cade, right? 290, 454 last year, 63% there, 2,800 yards passing, but 19 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and just wasn't the guy that they thought coming in, right? When he replaced DJU, they really fumbled that when we talked about how they kind of developed him his freshman year, kind of wishy-washy going back and forth. I think he struggled because of a lot of the things the coaching staff has not put in place. And I think with Riley there, I think there are a lot of issues to kind of iron out. The big thing to me is Antonio Williams makes this offense go. He played 5 games. He was really injured. He wasn't there. Like, what we're talking about with the injuries at the wide receiver position. So definitely there's hope out there. But I mean, there's reasons why that this Clemson kind of program is falling behind. And we're going to get into that, why it's falling behind there. But when you look at losses, really, Bo Collins moving on. I love Bo Collins. I know, shake your head all you want, but California kid came over there with DJU and I just expect him to be better. But he was flat out just not good. Like he was okay, 510 yards last year, but just struggled catching the football, struggled being an impact player. He was actually an impact player in high school. Don't know where that went from, but just didn't fit in this offense. Really struggled with quarterback play or whatever it was. Will Shipley was a guy that we liked, 827 yards last year, 244 receiving yards, but hadn't been the same guy since his freshman year. Like his freshman year, he was much better when you're talking as a runner and a pass catcher. Will Putnam as well. But not as many losses as you expect for this team. But again, really got to develop on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, this program relies on development at this point,
Yes.
and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I mean, I think replacing Shipley with Maffa and the guys that they have in that backfield, I think Shipley was a good player. Don't get me wrong, and I think that there's a reason that he was coveted by NFL teams, and there's a reason he's in the NFL now. But I think that you can replace what he gave you last year. He was fine. Same thing with Bo Collins, though. Like him being out there was not ideal for that team. So really, the notable losses aren't extensive, and the recruits really kind of fill that in as we get into that.
Yeah, of course. Let's go over to the recruits. I mean, they did a great. I mean, Clemson still recruits, right? Like top 15 program overall in the recruiting class last year, the 24 class. Composite was a top 11. TJ Moore is a dude, Christian. This kid can. Oh my God, you watch his tape. I just wish he didn't go to Clemson. Sorry, Clemson fans. I hope they do something with him because he is that special. Like 6'3", 195. He comes out there. And I think that, when you look at him, he is a program changer. Like he's a guy that like, hey, this is our wide receiver one. They've missed these guys. They had these guys before. Like where you think about their offense, T. Higgins comes to mind, right? They've had these guys where they really elevated themselves, gave them that one and said, hey, we got enough offense to go win a title. Like that's really what TJ Moore gives you. If Klubnik's anywhere better, all you got to do is throw it up to this kid. Like he is that special, and I think he can make an impact. Wesco is good too. I think he gets hated on a little bit because he's not TJ Moore, but Brian Wesco is also a very, very solid wide receiver, 11 overall from his position. Betancourt there again from tight end position. Again, they get really good tight ends. Braden Stoll is also there when you're talking about him. Elijah Thurman, Mason Wade, Ronan O'Connell. Again, they get some of these interior offensive linemen and they develop. That's really what their goal is there. But really, this class, the diamond is TJ Moore, right?
Oh yeah, he's my wide receiver 5 in Debbie right now. Yeah. But the craziest part is he's the wide receiver 3 in his own class because of how special this class is. But that's not a knock at all. This kid is absolutely special. When I watched, I dove into his film for our Debbie draft guide, and it was just he blew me away. I didn't have words to put on the paper. I struggled to write the scouting report because I was just like, yes. Yes, more of this, please. So I do hope that they're able to use him. I think he's on the field maybe as early as week 1. He has that type of impact where you kind of need him on the field. But just extending further into this class, Elijah Thurman's a dude too. I think as Walker Parks ages out or graduates again from grad school. Elijah Thurman's going to walk into that, and this offensive line is going to be better for it. But overall, yeah, they have to recruit well because of the current transfer policy.
Yeah, let's get into that. Why not? Key transfers, we just put a laughing emoji because he doesn't have any. And I know PFF put out a tweet, I think it was a couple days ago. They're going through like the best transfer from every single team in college football, and they put NA. And I was like, I cannot believe we're still talking about them having NA, no transfers in 2024. And I think Clemson fans think that too. I think Dabo, the way that he just doesn't address the needs of his teams in the transfer portal, I think that's going to put this program behind because, yes, they still recruit at a very high level, but they have no depth. And when guys get hurt, like we saw at the wide receiver position last year and other things, even at the offensive line position, if guys get hurt there, they don't have guys to plug in. They're plugging in like their 3-star kids they develop, their walk-ons, those things. That does not work in college football anymore. And I think you saw that last year. At some point, either Dabo's got to retire. He's going to move on because he's going to look at it and say, I don't want to do this transfer portal. Or someone in his inner circle needs to tell him, you have to do the transfer portal, right? Director of player personnel out there, Mike Dooley. Hey, Dabo, we got to go after the transfer portal. And when you see all these great coaches doing it and Dabo won't do it because he's so dang stubborn, that hurts this program. And that's really the key for me in this transfer is like, we're not going to talk about defensive transfers because they don't have any, but not adding transfers limits the ceiling of your program.
I think it's most frustrating too because they act like they have to go out into the portal and pay because that's all the kids in the portal care about. But you're still Clemson. You still have the brand recognition. You
Yeah.
still have the championship aspirations where some of these teams don't. Mississippi State, they're bringing in transfers. They might have to pay for those transfers, but you might be able to get that same exact player for no NIL money or, all this. It's all fake. It's all the same money, but you probably don't have to pay for those players as much as another
Yeah.
program because of your name, and you're still refusing to do it. Drives me insane. I understand the premise. Like, I do understand we want to invest in these kids. We want to show them that we believe in the kids that are in our program, but why not invest in the kids that are actively seeking your program out that might be a little bit older? I understand, like, it creates a level of competition as well. Just because you take a transfer doesn't mean you have to play them over a talented freshman. I don't know why they have that mindset, but alas, that's why we're talking about them now and not in a couple of weeks when we get into the top 10, I think.
And to me, there's no reason why. Like, let's talk about impact players. I'll just talk about Cade Klubnik. Cade Klubnik needs to be better. If Cade Klubnik is not better, this team is going to win 9 games again. Like, that's just plain and simple. He's not. But here's the thing, though. You use that transfer portal and you go get one of these veteran quarterbacks or someone to push him. That's how they get better. That competition breeds getting better. And I think that's the other area too. Bring guys in and make them compete. If these guys already think that they're going to start and they know that they're on the roster, I think that's a mistake. I think you bring them in, you compete, and you say, hey, you got to get better. We're going to bring this quarterback in and go after, hey, he's a kid from Ohio, let's say, or whatever. Like, he's coming in here to compete for the starting job here. Cade, you need to be better. That also helps your program, right? So I think that's a big thing. Cade's got to step up. I think the turnovers, the decision making, I think the arm, just the questionable throws that he makes, being within the offense, the rhythm, that's the big thing with Cade Klubnik. And this team's going to ride or die with him. And this offense, what Riley's trying to do and what Dabo's kind of built here with the wide receivers out there, if they stay healthy, if Cade can bounce back, they're going to compete for an ACC title. But if they don't, there's some ACC teams that are starting to take over that conference as well from a recruiting trail. Florida State on the recruiting trail, they got blue chips guys all over the place now. Like, Clemson's falling a little bit behind now. So really, Cade's got to take that next step for this program.
Yeah, and I just did a quick scroll through transfer quarterbacks, and I counted 14 in the first, like, 20-ish quarterbacks that I think probably would beat Cade Klubnik out
Yeah.
in a level competition. So, I think that's where it gets tough to talk about this team because they're still talented. They still have a ton of upside to win the ACC, but I don't think that they're in the same tier as maybe the favorites in the ACC at this point because of the lack of depth. What happens when, 2 or 3 of these receivers go down again? Cade Klubnik, we're out of excuses for him at this point. And I understand he's still a young player and there's a chance that he develops. But to me, yeah, everything rides and dies with Cade Klubnik. And I don't know that that's a position that a program should have to be in this era of college football.
And if Cade doesn't get better, Antonio Williams is going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Or he might leave anyway this year, but he might have to leave and go to a different program. And that's a problem. Like, in my opinion, that's going to be a problem. Now, let's go over to defense. I mean, this is a unit that put them in games, right? We talk about their defense. Clemson always has a great defense. So to be a little bit more optimistic for the Clemson fans out there, I mean, defense was great. 24 in the nation last year, opponents points per game. When you look at yards per game, they were 11th at 308 yards given up. Really, really good there from a rushing, defense standpoint. They did really well. They were a top 25 unit from a defense, from a passing perspective defense. That's where they struggled a little bit when you're looking at kind of yards per pass, passes per game, opponent yards per pass game, though. They did really well there. They were 12th in the country there in terms of, they just didn't give up a lot of yards there. Sack percentage, they were 43rd. So not as many sacks we were used to seeing a Clemson defense having, but they were a very solid unit. It kept them in games for sure.
Yeah, they've got a ton of talent on this side of the ball, as they always do. Barrett Carter is kind of that leader. Most people expected him to leave for the NFL draft. He chose to return. I think it's an interesting choice because I think, he probably would have been a top 75 pick with that linebacker class last year. So interesting choice. Maybe he's trying to work his way into the first round. I think the film suggests that there's upside for that. Avion Terrell, you might recognize the name. Clemson fans, you already know, but that's AJ Terrell's younger brother. So that, good lineage there. A lot of good lineage there. RJ Mickens is still there. Peter Woods is just a dude. Obviously he was kind of behind some folks on the depth chart, but he got over 300 snaps, and when he was out there, it's just absolutely fantastic. So there's guys. I think Jaden Lucas is someone that they're excited about.
Mhm.
TJ Parker's another guy that I think can be an impact player, but overall, just the depth on this side is fine actually. They wouldn't have to hit the portal to get guys on this side, but hopefully they lost a lot. Hopefully they can kind of just replace the way they have been. But I think this side of the ball is definitely in a much more stable state.
Yeah, I gotta give you want to give Wes Goodwin a shout out. Taking over from Brent Venables, and Brent Venables obviously was just that elite defensive coordinator. And his last year, I mean, the one other area of note for him, this defense that he led him to, they led in turnovers forced at 28 this last year. Like that was what they did, and that's why if they had just some serviceable of an offense that just scored in the red zone, they would have competed. Like they would have been right there again. And that was really where the big notice was. Now you kind of hinted a little bit at the losses. Yeah, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I mean, these guys, Clemson just pumps out linebackers and edge guys. I mean, that's really what they do. Even from a secondary perspective, Nate Wiggins was one of my favorites. I really liked him. I know he dropped a little bit, but really, really good there. Xavier Thomas, those guys. I mean, Jeremiah Trotter, when you're looking at the stats and what he was able to do, I think not only a ton of that, 88 tackles, 5.5 sacks, those type of things, 2 interceptions. Leader, though, like that leadership really for Trotter is one of those things that they're losing there. So, yeah, they're going to have to replace a lot, but they got a lot behind them. These they do a great job of recruiting on the defensive side.
Yeah, another player that had been there for a long time, but Tyler Davis just didn't fit on the graphic. They lost a bit on that interior defensive line, but they, like we just talked about, they just kind of replace, and the production never seems to dip. I think they're in a good spot for that to continue. Andrew Makuba, though, so that's one you lost to the portal, and he's over at Texas now. So that I think speaks to the difference in those two programs now.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, that would be a shocking thing maybe 5 years ago with how Dabo built this program up. Now I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. So it's a lot to lose, but they are in fine shape.
Yeah, they are. And recruiting wise, guys, again, like we're talking about the recruiting on this side, they did a great job from that recruiting class. They brought in some dudes on their side, Darian Mayo as well, Noah Dixon. The big guy, though, the guy that they absolutely love, the guy that I think is going to get on the field pretty early, Sammy Brown, linebacker out there. Sammy Brown, when you're looking at that, he's the highest ranked linebacker in recruit in program history. So he's number 2 overall there. So they absolutely got him, and he is a freak. He was on 247 Sports Freak list. When you're looking at that, as a sophomore in high school, he was the wrestling tournament champion, 34-2 there. Gold medal, and when you're looking at wrestling tournaments as well, and track. I mean, he was absolutely phenomenal. He was a champion in the 400-meter dash as a freshman. So athleticism, just strength, size, all of those things that you have to like there. 10.7 in the 100-yard dash as well. I mean, these are things that stand out to you. And defense last year, he had 153 tackles in high school, 2 receptions, forced fumble. Oh, and also, you know what he did? He was a running back. 255 attempts for 2,200 yards and 36 touchdowns. Sammy Brown is a dude. Like, you ever see all those old movies of like the linebacker just covering speed and doing that, and then also playing there. And just a stud. I mean, they absolutely love him. And then when you get him around all these other guys, Ricardo Jones, Corian Gibson, Fegan, all those guys. I mean, this is their crown jewel of a class. Plus, the wide receivers that we talked about, right? When you're thinking of Wesco, on the other side, TJ Moore, this is a hell of a recruiting class.
Yeah, Sammy Brown was the one I was going to highlight for sure. I do want to mention Drew Woodaz is joining his brother in that linebacking room, so that's an exciting, fun little story that I'm sure we're going to hear a ton on broadcast. But yeah, Sammy Brown is the dude. I think he probably, we didn't have him slated as a starter on the depth chart, if only because there is some depth in that linebacker room, but he will certainly earn snaps. He'll be on the field at least a little bit. Dabo he struggles with the transfer portal, but he does know how to, give a little bit of leash so that these guys stick around. I think Sammy Brown could be an impact player for them down the stretch, though. If this team manages to win and be in playoff positioning, I think Brown is going to be a big part of that.
He's a dude, man. You're just watching him. You're just like, oh my gosh, he's gonna be flying around. I mean, that's what Clemson does. That's why it's so frustrating when we talk about transfers. They just filled in a little bit. they'd be right there in a national championship contention every year. Again, like that's really where they're at. Now, as far as impact players, because there's no transfers on the defensive side either. Barrett Carter is there, in terms of that, like the 67 tackles last year, 3.5 sacks. I know we put him on there. RJ Mickens, again, 50 tackles. Those both guys that, flirted with the NFL, but then came back. So you have to love that. We talked about Sammy Brown. He's not on here. Peter Woods, Avion Terrell, those type of guys. Who is your big standout this year, you think, that needs to take that step?
I mean, Avion Terrell, I think we've seen some good games from him. He played in 9 games last year, but I just want to see him take that next step as a coverage player. He had 1 interception last year, only 2 pass breakups, but I think with Nate Wiggins in the lineup, like I do think that this cornerback room is in really good shape if Avion Terrell takes that step as that number 1 guy. They do, it's tough to pick out impact players on this defense though, because any one of the 12 secondary players that they have, or more than that, but like you get the point. Any one of those guys can step up and be that surprise dude. So everything starts and ends with Barrett Carter, but I think the guys around him are going to be more impactful, if only because we know what Barrett Carter is going to give you for that defense.
Yeah, 100% there. All right, let's look at their schedule. Let's talk about it a little bit. It's interesting. It's an interesting schedule here. They're at 9.5 wins. That's their win total over under there. Big game early. Georgia coming in. Let's see what Georgia looks like, right? In terms of that, one of the bigger games of the beginning of the year in the 24 season. App State is no pushover either. App State is just going to be one of those games where it's tough. NC State, can they kind of come back from that? Stanford, again, new ACC opponent, Stanford. Still, it's weird saying that out loud. Florida State, Wake Forest, Virginia, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh, the Citadel, and South Carolina. Hey, there are no gimmies. There are no games on this where you're like, oh, yeah. I mean, there's a few where you're like, yeah, they should beat Virginia. But I mean, this is competitive. This is one of the more competitive schedules that we've covered so far in this series. So shout out Clemson for doing that. But I could see, like, you're looking at those top 25 wins and seeing 9.5, like, you might be a little nervous taking the over here.
Yep. I think the gimme is the Citadel. If they can't beat the Citadel, that'll be pretty rough. But you're right. I mean, their conference games are tough. Having an out of conference Georgia matchup is not ideal with this conference schedule. NC State's a tough game. Florida State, tough game. I think Louisville is going to be a tough game. Virginia Tech is a sneaky tough game, especially going to Virginia Tech. I think that they can pull a few of those out, but I have to hit the under because hitting the over means that I'm betting on this offense to be significantly better. I don't necessarily know that I think that they're going to take that massive step forward. I think they're going to take a step forward, but I don't think it's going to be massive enough to win all those games. So I'm hitting the under. I'm not locking that because I think that there's potential for this team to outperform that, but I'm hitting the under.
I'm hitting under as well. So we're going to agree on this one. We don't tend to agree very much in terms of the over-unders on these, and we haven't this year. But I just don't trust Cade Klubnik in this offense. And if they prove me wrong, great. That's one of those ones where, like, that streaky shooter that hits like 6 threes in a game, you just shake his hand. Same thing with Cade Klubnik. All right, dude, you know what? You proved me wrong in this offense. And I worry about their depth. I think that they're very solid at certain positions. But if they get injured, like you're talking, even like their starting tight end, Jake Brenningstoll, if he gets injured, who's next? Josh Sapp, these other guys, Olsen, Pat Henry. Some of these guys, you're like, hey, will they really be able to elevate this offense? What does that look like? The depth at their offensive line, will that help them as well if they get injured there? And I think they have some really, really tough games. And I think that from there, I think they do get the 9 wins. So it's a very coin flip, right? That 9 to 10, like they win a game that you're like, oh, I think there's some potential at Florida State to be fun. Little DJU bringing them back. Yeah, I'm circling that game. That's just going to be a fun, just, hey, let's see who's going to come after this game at Florida State. And I think they can win that game. I think that Cade Klubnik is a better quarterback than DJU. I actually do think that. But even then, it's like, hey, tough in the middle of the year. Where's that depth at? So yeah, for Clemson, to me, I'm going the under on the 9.5. If that was 8.5, I'd hit the over. I mean, that's how close it is, I think, in terms of where the team is at. But really, it comes down to this, like, if they want to compete, and I think here's the kicker, though. Are Clemson fans, are you going to be okay with just making the playoff? Because I think you will. I think in a 12-team playoff, Clemson should compete for a playoff spot most years, as long as they stay healthy and they're there. Or do you want to, like, go in that transfer portal and go get guys and try to win national titles? I think that is where, and you have to remember, too, I'm not going to crap on, Dabo too much, because before Dabo became the head coach, Clemson was kind of a laughingstock for most years. Like, it was very, like, they underperformed all the time. Dabo did win the national title, so you can't take that away from him. But sometimes you got to have that change. Hey, how can I develop this program there? And so Clemson fans, let us know. What do you think? Do you feel like he should kind of do that? Are you comfortable where this program is at? But that's really my takeaway. They have the talent defensively. I think they can move and kind of go over there. There might be some regression from the takeaways perspective because they had a lot last year. But they're going to be solid on the defensive side. But can that offense get them over the hump?
Yeah, good leaders adapt, and so we're gonna find out if Dabo's a good leader, if he's just stuck in his ways. I fear it's the latter, and yeah, this might just be what it is. Maybe Clemson is just competing for a playoff spot, and maybe that's okay. But I think the expectation should be higher. I know they kind of I wouldn't call it got lucky, but Trevor Lawrence being there certainly helped our mindset of what this program is. But I'm curious to see if they can. I mean, they need to go out and get another quarterback or keep quarterbacks committed here. And then maybe I think they can overcome some of those challenges. But for right now, it's compete for a playoff spot. And right now, I would say they're on the outside looking in.
Yeah. Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, not too bad quarterbacks to have there. And I think that's one of those things you're looking at from a recruiting cycle. Going through the Elite 11, you're like, man, where's Clemson? Where is Clemson going? Like, why am I not seeing that? And they'll get guys. I know Christopher Vizina's, those guys are there, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Clemson fans, let us know what you think. How many wins you think you're going to be, going at? Can you hit the 10? Are you going to complete for the playoff? And how do you feel about your team moving forward?